Neither COVID-19 nor sporadic terror attacks could deter him. It was too dangerous for the Pope to drive from the airport in his normal open-topped vehicle. But those Iraqis who turned out to greet him are thrilled and slightly amazed that he came at all. Police outriders led the way. The government has put an extra 10,000 security officers on the streets of Baghdad. No Pope has ever visited Iraq before. Francis was taken to the presidential palace, where he and Prime Minister al-Khadami were greeted by traditional dancers, symbols of Iraq's history of religious and cultural diversity, damaged by the sectarian violence of recent years.
All this has brought in its wake death, destruction and ruin. Not only materially, the damage is so much deeper if we think of the heartbreak endured by so many individuals and communities, and wounds that will take years to heal.
10 years ago, 58 Christians were murdered by al-Qaeda gunmen in Baghdad's Syro-Catholic cathedral. Many survivors then chose to leave Iraq. Since 2003, the country's Christian population has declined from 1.5 million to just 250,000. Today, the Pope went to the same cathedral to try to give hope not only to those Christians who've remained behind, but also to those of other faiths who've stood against the persecution of minorities.
I want to return now to our brothers and sisters who died in the terror attack in this cathedral 10 years ago, for which the beatification process continues. Their death strongly reminds us that incitement to war, hate, violence and bloodshed is not compatible with religious teachings. I want to remember all the victims of violence and persecutions, whichever religious communities they belong to.
Outside, Christians had to watch on their phones because they weren't allowed into the cathedral for security reasons. Still, at least the Pope was there.
I was really looking forward to seeing him, or at least catching a glimpse. But what can we do? These are orders, but we thank God for this visit.
The Grand Immaculate Church in Karakosh near Mosul was destroyed by the Islamic State in 2014 and recaptured by Iraqi forces 2 years later. This was Iraq's biggest and one of its most ancient Christian communities. Some here speak Aramaic as Jesus did. Now they've rebuilt and are readying for the Pope, who'll hold a socially distanced mass there on Sunday. They're picking lots because everyone wants to attend. The faithful who've survived ISIS, remained in Iraq and have a chance to pray with their Pope are not so worried about catching COVID-19. Tomorrow he'll go to Najaf to see Ayatollah Sistani, the most revered Shiite cleric in Iraq. Two religious leaders trying to spread harmony and peace. The Pope was determined to visit this place where Christianity has its roots, but where Christians fear to practice their religion, where a link to an ancient past might yet be broken.
Now, until the Pope and his entourage arrived in Iraq today, Reverend Joseph Kassar was the only Jesuit priest in the country. I spoke to him earlier and began by asking him about the significance of the papal visit.
I can hardly begin to describe it, but for a country that has suffered so much because of war, of conflict, of sectarian division, and of the rise and demise, let's say, of ISIS over the past 4 decades, the Pope's message of peace and human fraternity and living together is simply something really unique, extraordinary. It also puts into focus the suffering of so many people in Iraq and communicates the message that Iraq is not forgotten, the people who have suffered are not forgotten.
What is life like on a day-to-day basis for Christians in Iraq?
Well, I suppose much of it depends also where they are located, if they have been displaced, and many have been displaced, especially the Christians of the Nineveh Plains. The life of people who have been displaced continues to be challenging because the political situation is not yet resolved. The outlook is not clear.
But realistically, is there anything the Pope can do or say while on this trip which would encourage all those displaced Christians to come back to Iraq?
I'm not sure that that will happen. The Pope does not hold that switch. But it may encourage those who are here to stay. It might be an invitation for some of the people to return, but return is a personal decision, a decision of the family, of the household, of the individual. It must be voluntary, safe, dignified, and also sustainable. If people can't leave, if people cannot live, if people cannot survive because there are no jobs or because of perceived or actual insecurity in the places, it will be very, very difficult for people to return.
Now, we know the Pope is going to meet with the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, the most revered Shia cleric in Iraq. He's rarely seen in public. He rarely agrees to meet anyone. What are we to take from the fact that he is willing to meet Pope Francis?
I think there's a uniqueness to that visit. And hopefully it will also encourage all the people who look up to Ali al-Sistani to realize that Pope Francis' visit to Iraq is about Iraq, is about Iraqis. It's not only about Iraqi Christians who have been here for, well, since the early times. It's for the whole of Iraq. And I suppose that if that message goes out to the followers of Ali al-Sistani and all people who hold him in high regard, I think that would be a very important outcome.
Now, there is no doubt how important this trip is to the Pope himself. He's ended a year of lockdown to make sure he can visit Iraq. But I suppose the question is whether this was the right time for the Pope to make this visit, because there are people who may accuse him of putting people in danger because of the coronavirus situation in Iraq at the moment.
In a place like Iraq, it is difficult to know when it is the right time. And I suppose there will always be, for one reason or another, one time that is not right. I think that all things put together, I do hope, and it is not an irresponsible decision, I do hope that this is the right time to go ahead with this visit. I hope it will leave the desired fruit.
Father Joseph Casal, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.